Right, so thank you very much indeed. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Here I am again. My name is Magnus Nielsen. I'm still on the trail of Jack the Ripper, and I'm talking about the death of Martha Tabram. And what I want to do is just show you the sort of part of London which she lived. Of course, many of the houses in this district were pulled down many years ago, but this is just to give you an idea. If we are looking directly in front of me, this elegant Victorian arch, which says it's erected by the 4% Industrial Dwellings Company. It was put up in 1886. Again, this was another project by philanthropists to provide cheap accommodation for members of the working class in this district. The houses, I say, were all pulled down. The present buildings date from the 1980s, I would reckon, by looking at them. I'm walking down Flower and Dean Walk. That's what it calls itself at the present moment. But back in the day, it was known as George Street. And the alignment of Old George Street has now been completely changed. So it's not going to be so easy to relate exactly where the various common lodging houses and doss houses used to be. But times have changed, and this is a very attractive area, I might add. I wouldn't mind living here myself. If I weren't living where I'm currently living, I'm not dissatisfied, but if I had to move here, I would be quite pleased. Now, coming down here, I say George Street. This street is Old Thrall Street, and it's parallel to Wentworth Street. So it runs east to west, or rather, yeah, this is east and that is west. But what I want to do is go further forward. I want to head north this time, and I want to head down to the site of Old Flower and Dean Street, which has completely vanished. Now, Flower and Dean Street was said to be the epicenter of evil way back in the day. These houses that were built then were built in the late 1600s and for families, and the families eventually moved out in the 1700s, and they were then taken over by speculative landlords who filled them up with as many tenants as they possibly could cram in, and these became the common lodging houses, and they were sinks of vice and iniquity, places for haunts of thieves and prostitutes. So we have Flower and Dean Street, or not exactly, it isn't called Flower and Dean Street anymore. Flower and Dean Street have completely disappeared. And what we have instead, this is New Thrall Street, and New Thrall Street leads westward towards Lulworth Close, and that was probably Old Flower and Dean Street. Now, the reason I've brought you down here is because two of Jack the Ripper's victims, that was Martha Tabram and Mary Ann Nichols, used to live in the common lodging houses just a little way ahead of us somewhere, not exactly where, but somewhere not far from here. We also had Catherine Eddowes, and we had Liz Stride, who lived in Flower and Dean Street. And then going further forward and just turning around the corner to the right and then to the left, you come into Dorset Street, where you find the accommodation for Mary Jane Kelly and also Annie Chapman. So the point I'm making is that all 6 victims were living in the same immediate neighbourhood, and since they were all working had the same sort of line of work, I believe that they must at least have been acquainted with each other to some extent. We don't know exactly how well acquainted they were, but they must have been able to recognize each other across the street. And I also believe that Flower and Dean Street, well, I'd say I believe, studies at the University of Texas in 2006 produced a formula. What they did was they studied serial murders, hundreds if not thousands of serial murders, in relation to where the murderer lived and to where the murders were committed, so they could work out how to find the murderer just by the murder sites. And then a while later the Metropolitan Police took over this idea, and they came to the conclusion, when they applied the formula to this district, they got all this together and they then projected it onto a map of Victorian London, and they came to the conclusion that Jack the Ripper must have lived in Flower and Dean Street. If he didn't live in Street, he must have lived very close by. So the official Metropolitan Police epicentre of the murders is Flower and Dean Street. Mine is the crossroads of Wentworth Street, Old Montague Street, Brick Lane and Osborne Street. So, the question is it possible that I can be wrong? And the answer to that is yes, of course I can be. It's quite possible. I have to yield to opinion that is more specialised than mine. I like to hang on to my idea about the crossroads at least for a little while. The point I'm actually trying to make is that I came to my conclusions just by intuition, and the University of Texas came to their conclusions by statistical science. And really, the different epicentres are not so very far from each other, and it drives home the point that Jack the Ripper was very much a local man. He would not have been a cotton merchant from Liverpool, nor would he have been a barrister living in Blackheath, nor would he have been H.H. Holmes. Anyway, here we are. What I've now done is I've arrived in Brick Lane, and this gives me an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to show you Brick Lane in all its glory. Brick Lane was named in the 1400s. There was established an industry to create bricks and tiles, and it was built over by the mid-18th century. As we look down Brick Lane, you may be able to make out in the distance a very tall metallic column, which is the minaret of the local mosque. Now, the building of the mosque went up in 1743 as a Huguenot chapel. The Huguenots were French Protestants who settled in this area in the late 17th and early 18th century, and they built their own place of worship, which they had kept for many, many years. And then eventually, when they moved out and moved on to other parts of London and other parts of Britain, the Jews took it over as a synagogue, and it became a synagogue for many, many years while they had the Jewish population here. And then the Jews moved out, and then the Bengali Muslims moved in, and they have now turned it into a mosque. So this is the only building in the world that has been a Christian church and a Jewish synagogue and a Muslim mosque. The only one in the world, ladies and gentlemen. If you go a little bit beyond that, there's one street leading off on the left. The second street that leads off on the left is Hanbury Street, and that is the scene of the murder of Annie Chapman, and I'll be talking more about that a little bit later on. I don't want to preempt this, but what I want to talk about really is the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, or at least the events in the very last evening of her life. She had, I say, absconded from her employer, stole a large quantity of clothes, and come to settle in the common lodging houses in July of 1888. And she supported herself as best she could through prostitution, and she was seen on the 30th of August drinking in a pub here on this site, which I'm going to show you. It's called, or was called, the Frying Pan, and it's now been turned into a place called Oodles, I beg your pardon, Oodles, and it's the art of Indo-Chinese cuisine. So if you like Indo-Chinese food, that's certainly the place to go. But anyway, she was here during the evening of August the 30th. She must have drunk something like 8 glasses of gin. She said that she'd had her DOS money, 4pence, 3 times over. So she must have had 3 clients as well. She must have been quite an active evening. She was wearing a black bonnet. Whether she'd actually purchased this bonnet, we don't know. It's possible some clothes that she may have taken from her former employer, but she was wearing, very proud of this bonnet. Anyway, she'd had 8 glasses of gin that evening. She must have been completely legless. Somehow or other, she staggered back to her old DOS house, penniless, and she sat in the kitchen for a while, and she tried to beg the deputy, the man who was in charge, the manager of the common lodging house, to give her a free bed for the night. He just wouldn't put up with that idea. And so she was thrown out at 1:30 in the morning. And so she spent about an hour or so wandering through these streets. She told the deputy, she said, "Don't let the bed go. I'll be back shortly. You'll see what a jolly bonnet I've got." And with that, she just walked out. As I say, she spent the next hour or so wandering around these streets, hopelessly looking for a client and not finding one. Now, it happened that on the evening of the 30th of August, there'd been a tremendous fire in one of the warehouses in the Docklands. It was a huge blaze, and it attracted large crowds. People from all over the neighbourhood just come down to watch buildings burn. I think that's probably one of the favourite occupations of Londoners. We just love to see buildings on fire. Anyway, heading down here, I'm making my way southward now, back towards the Whitechapel Road. And you'll see on either side we have these cafes. You can also see the Hampton at Hilton's. Now, there was a Jack the Ripper conference I attended there in 2019, I think it was. So they have these Jack the Ripper conferences, or at least they used to, before they had the COVID crisis. And I'm rather hoping that they will revive this idea. A Jack the Ripper conference in London, and I think there's another one in New York. So if you're really enthusiastic about Jack the Ripper and his activities, you can attend these conferences, and you can spend a long time talking about them to people who share your passion. Anyway, I'm talking about Mary Ann Nichols and her hapless quest for a client. She needed 4pence. She had absolutely no money at all. And as she made her way down here towards Whitechapel High Street, she happened to bump into Emily Holland. Now, Emily Holland, she'd actually shared a room with Emily Holland and 2 other women at her common lodging house. And when she bumped into Emily Holland tried to encourage her to return, but she said she had no money and that she had to go and look for a client. And so they parted company. This was at 2:30 in the morning, And the last we know about Mary Ann Nichols is that she's heading along the Whitechapel Road in the general direction of Mile End, and that's where I will talk about her murder in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye for now, ladies and gentlemen. Over and out.